Alright, as you probably picked up by this point, today we're going to explore how the same person can go about their creative process and do something so insanely right and so insanely, incredibly, horribly wrong. So yeah, once again, this is one of those ones where let's just heap praises on something and let's just completely and totally say horrible, terrible things about something else. So obviously, we'll want to start from the beginning, which is with Sin City, when you look at these two anyway. And Sin City was this really big deal when it came out. I remember it very, very vividly, especially when that first trailer broke and they played Cells and all. This movie made that song famous, and it's nowhere to be found in the actual movie. It played during the trailer, it plays during the DVD menu, but not actually in the movie. And it was this gigantic cast in this movie that just looked like a comic book come to life in a way that we had never seen before. And there was so much hype going into it, and while it wasn't like totally, completely, insanely successful, the people who came out of it more or less came out with exactly what they wanted out of it. I, once again, vividly remember the reactions of our friend circle when they walked out of this movie. And it was all, I just remember when me and my brother left the theater, we just drove around for like 2 hours because he was so excited and couldn't settle down after we'd gotten out of the theater. Like, it completely changed his mood for that entire day. And it was because at the time, we had had comic book movies come out, like, X-Men and Raimi Spider-Man movies were coming out at that time, but we had never really seen, at least off the top of my head, a comic book come to life in such a way that looked exactly like that, to the point that I'm pretty sure this isn't even considered an adaptation. Like, Frank Miller's books were the script. And they just took those images and just put them right on the screen. And the thing is that it felt so huge, and obviously Miller gets a co-directing credit, but our other director obviously is Robert Rodriguez. And the interesting thing is that this movie just feels so incredibly massive. Like, when you look at it, it just looks like something so insanely expensive, until you see Rodriguez's name, and then you remember, this is the guy that makes movies on, like, micro-budgets out of his garage, literally. And how do we come to this, from that? And sure enough, it does, when you look at it, it's insane how they were able to take something that ultimately does look incredibly cheap. When you go, if you get like the really special edition DVD that my brother has, you'll find that special feature where it's sped up, but they basically show you the whole movie as it really was, where it's just the actors and the green screen, and that's about it. Occasionally, like a little set will be there, or obviously stuff like, cars or props or whatever, but apart from that, everything else is that green screen. And you realize how there's really not a whole lot to it, but Rodriguez was able to make it look totally and completely massive. There was actually a point where I was watching, I think it was a Tarantino interview, where he was talking about how he and Rodriguez had talked about, because of this, it was like, is this gonna work? Like, are we totally, completely sure this is going to come out exactly the way we want it to? Regardless of the success we've already seen, this is something totally different. And then, basically, with those doubts in mind, Tarantino went to the set, and the first thing he saw when he got there was Mickey Rourke in the Marv makeup. And when he saw Mickey Rourke in that makeup, it was like, yeah, we got this. This is gonna work. It's like, that's all it took. And that's another thing, too, is with all this green screen and with all these, fake effects in here, it's interesting how much they went out, with the makeup, because we see, the Marv makeup. I remember it totally, completely blowing my mind to find out that when Nick Stahl was Yellow Bastard, that it wasn't CGI, that they actually put, like, an enormous mask on him and that whole appearance. Obviously, it wasn't yellow at the time they shot it, but still, just the fact that that's actually Nick Stahl underneath this stuff is insane. Even when you're watching the makeup process and the special features, you can't tell it's him underneath. So this, and when I talk about the massiveness of it, that also is not just what it looks like, but also the characters in it just feel like really, really big characters. Even somebody like Hartigan, who's just this old, worn-out cop that's like, you know, on his dying legs, and that moment when after he's punched out Madsen, when he's on the ground and then he stands up, just that shot of him makes him feel like this massive character, regardless of all the things wrong with him. And all the characters feel like that. They just feel huge, no matter the part, whether the part is big or small, or if they're only there for a second, like Josh Hartnett. Josh Hartnett's bookends the movie, and we get no information on him whatsoever. We know he's a hitman, obviously, but apart from that, we just know absolutely nothing about this dude. I also really love that when the sequel came out, you kind of wondered who all they were going to go into and who was going to carry over. I love that he just kind of never came back, and that he's always just going to be that mystery forever. So even characters like that who don't even have an explanation apart from it's clear what their profession is still just something that holds on to you for all these years afterwards. And it's and by the way, I do actually really like the sequel. I know a lot of people don't, but I haven't seen it since the theater too. But I am going to revisit it sometime this week after talking about this. So we'll see. But when that sequel came out, though, it did make you realize just how the greatness of this movie and how much that even if it wasn't a long delayed sequel, the question is, was something ever going to hold up to this? Especially following, yeah, we'll get there. But going on even further, I talked about Tarantino. Let's mention this whole special director credit. At first I wondered what exactly the point of that was. Research told me that apparently, basically the only reason Tarantino directed that one scene with Clive Owen and Del Toro in the car was it was Rodriguez kind of trying to bring Tarantino over from film into digital. Apparently it didn't work, but it was able to kind of get him into that world. Because when you watch it, it kind of makes you wonder, even when you watch the special features, there's that segment where they're showing how this scene's being made. And it ends up, Benicio del Toro seems to pretty much direct like half the scene that's the Tarantino scene. So it does kind of make you wonder what the point is, but it is interesting to see that this movie was also used as just an exercise for one friend to try to get another friend to try something different. And there's such a close-knit thing here, but usually in those instances something fails. Like it gets a little too close, and people get a little too comfortable with their work, and they end up kind of just running through it without putting the quality into it. But this really just shines through as something that was just a real labor of love, despite the fact that it really, on the outskirts, like if you were just on the set, it would look like not a whole lot was going into it. Just actors and a green screen, with the occasional really impressive makeup. But they were able to put this together in a way where a lot of the imagery just feels so like you're inside a nightmare. Like one that stands out that's really brief is when Marv is in the courtroom when he's being sentenced. It's just really brief, but it feels like something you'd see like fleeting in a dream or something. But then there's the really nightmare-inducing stuff like Elijah Wood. Elijah Wood as Kevin, where we have this whole segment that seems to come from out of nowhere, where we go into murder and cannibalism. And this character is so number one, the interesting thing is you would never really see Elijah Wood as a threat before Sin City and after Sin City. Like he's a little shady in Eternal Sunshine. That's about it. So when you watch this, and you see this character, this horrifying character, who does all this with no lines, it's just his appearance, where there's an innocence about him because it's Elijah Wood, and he's got his little sweater and everything, he reads the damn Bible and shit, but then you see, like, just what he does with his eyes is really damn creepy. Not just the moment when he's, like, dying and doesn't react. he's dying horribly and has no expression. But there's just kind of that, you get a sense of that hungry look in him when he's like attacking Marv and all that. He's got the fingernails and shit. And what I love about the fact that he has no lines is the scene later with Rutger Hauer when he's describing how he came to have Kevin in his life, and he says that Kevin has the voice of an angel, but I'm the only one that's heard it. And the fact that we don't hear him speak ever, but he's described as having the voice of an angel, and we just have to imagine what that is coming out of this character, makes him even creepier and more terrifying with just this little tiny detail that Rutger Hauer gives us in passing. And I thought that was really effective too. And then another character who I don't think, like obviously there's all the characters with all the recognizable faces, but we have these characters on the side too. Some are familiar, some are not. An actor who I wasn't aware of at the time that I'm obviously fully aware of now is, I like Tommy Flanagan's part in this. Like, he's really just there, he's really just some, henchman mercenary or whatever. But he's the dude that Clive Owen has to chase into the sewers for Jackie Boy's head. And I'd never really paid attention to how much I liked this character until I realized it was Tommy Flanagan, but yeah, he just kind of makes an impact in his small screen time too, and kind of would show, obviously he'd already been in 2 Best Picture winners at this point, but it would show later that he was able to play all these other roles that have made him a much more recognizable face down the road, specifically like Sons of Anarchy and Smoking Aces and all that. So that's another one of those characters that just shows you, whether big or small, the characters really are a big factor in bringing this movie to life, and not just its style. This would easily be one of those movies that would get credit, but simply for being a movie it would get credit simply for its style, where it would be defended by saying, you don't really need a whole lot of story when you have a style that just works this well and it's just this much of a visual orgasm. But the thing about it is, the stories in this movie really kick ass too. It's not even just the crime aspects too. You've got to appreciate the fact that you look at the stories and you think, well, this will probably just be all style without the storytelling being much of a thing. But for starters, the visuals do have a great way of telling the story. Like the whole, like when we see Marv on the bed with Goldie, and that's the only thing that's in the frame for a while until Kevin opens the door, which is one of my favorite shots in the movie. But you also have this, obviously Marv's story is just, an average revenge story, done very well, but then you go into it and then it's like, you have this story where it just starts off with Clive Owen and Brittany Murphy being a couple, and she's got an abusive boyfriend that's Benicio del Toro, who they've kind of uglified. It's weird how much they change his appearance just by adding a little more to his chin and nose. They take this person like Benicio del Toro, who's known for their good looks, and just make him this really just uncomfortable looking bad person. And you think it's just going to be that, and then this somehow evolves into an all-out war with this relentless gang of prostitutes and the mob, and the whole Benicio del Toro's severed head will decide if there's an all-out war or not. These are insane stories, and then this whole thing with another thing that kind of feels like a very basic story is this whole thing with Hartigan, when he has to protect Nancy from a captor, from somebody who is going to eventually try to rape and murder her. The thing is, though, is you add a huge sense of flair to this obvious story by making this captor this very grotesque yellow person. And it's like, the stories in this kick just as much ass as the visuals that are telling them. And then you've got the little side aspects in there too, like talking about Hartigan, where you have this movie that's just completely drenched in blood and violence and just grotesquerie in general. But then right here in the middle you have, or towards the end really, you have this story where it's an old guy who saved a girl, but the truth cannot be known, it has to be hidden, so he spends 8 years and her letters are all that he lives off of. This whole story by itself could have been like take away the style of the movie and just make this the story of an old guy in prison, and the reason he's in there is for doing something good, but nobody will ever know that, and the only person that knows is this little girl that he only gets to talk to through letters. That's like Oscar-winning short film material if you didn't have the stories around it and the style. And that's just right in the middle of this movie, but it all fits in well, and it's somehow even told in the style that it's told in. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change the impact of it. Willis really brings on that. This is before Willis stopped giving a shit. And how they do the whole noir thing with his story as well, where obviously a lot of movies nowadays kind of try to capture the film noir thing, and they don't do it very well. Like, the closest I think we've had to it, and for a while, was when Paul Thomas Anderson did Inherent Vice. Before that, I really couldn't tell you, but, well, while we're in this era where a lot of new movies think they can do the film noir thing, but seem to totally not be able to just grasp the aspect of it, this whole Hartigan story, it basically feels like you're watching a 1940s movie, up to and including the black and white. And so that's something that I always thought this movie just really, really accomplished, and really makes that story feel strong, because it really, really succeeds in capturing what apparently we're learning more and more is a hard thing to capture, no matter how hard you're trying. And that just, too, goes on to the whole, really, you could go on all day about singing the praises of the visual aspects of it. There's all that stuff I was talking about, the nightmare-inducing stuff, but then there's just stuff like when it's like always raining, or when it's not raining, it looks like it's just rained, or when they bring snow into it towards the end. When Marv is looking at the Rourke thing and it's raining, it basically just looks like Marv is behind white noise. Which might sound like a criticism in another movie, but here it's definitely a compliment because they just do it so well. And they have those perfect things. It would probably feel like a bit obvious in how, like, they could just totally random, not even think about it, and just add places of color in it. And but they kind of do the whole, the red coat and Schindler's List thing. They're really decisive about where they put the color. And they just, every time you see color in this movie, it feels like it was really, really thought out where it was going to go and why it's there. Sometimes it's just there to look cool. Like when you see, like, if there's something that has a very distinctive color, Rodriguez will put it in there. Like, Marv's pill bottle is in color while everything else around him is black and white. And then there's the whole, sometimes another effect I really like is Marv's bandages, where it makes you feel like there's more color on the screen, because even though it's in black and white, Marv's bandages are just whiter than every other white thing in the frame. I always like the stuff like, there's a couple of things with Dwight, like his red shoes, or a moment I really love is when they're pulled over, when he's got Jackie Boy in the car with him, the Tarantino moment. This might have been after Tarantino was directing it, but there's the color when the police lights fill the car, but then there's also the moment when he's got the flashlight on his face, and I love how there's color in Dwight's face wherever the flashlight is hitting. I always thought it was a really cool effect. But then there's stuff where they kind of use it almost like foreshadowing, where this is actually just me throwing a theory out there, and I don't even know if this is intentional or not. It might be if I research it more, but when you look at people's eyes, I don't remember specifically how many characters have where you can see the color in their eyes, but I know there's at least two, and they both kind of work in the same way, where it's Rutger Hauer and Alexis Bledel both have blue eyes when we see them. Bledel's are actually even bluer, I think, when we see them, but I thought it was really interesting for those two characters to have the blue eyes, because there's always kind of, I don't know, I guess there's like a certain innocence or something about blue eyes. Kind of like the contrast of Henry Fonda in Once Upon a Time in the West being the character he is while having them. But there's also, you look at Rutger Hauer's character and Alexis Bledel's character, and we see the blue eyes in both of them, and they both have this appearance about them that makes them seem innocent on the outside when really they're totally untrustworthy, where obviously Rutger Hauer is a cardinal, so immediately think he must be a good person, but then of course he's got this horrible, horrible backstory to the point that we even learn that he's practices cannibalism with Kevin. And then of course Alexa Bledel plays up this very innocent vibe to her, this very, you know, average everyday girl thing. And it turns out that she's a spy to get all the other prostitutes killed. So I really like how that it kind of works as a facade using color in that sense. So when going back to the film noir thing, you'll notice that there's probably a lot of moments here that look fake, and they're unfortunately probably nowadays, because the movie is 12 years old now, it may possibly be looked back on as the movie's effects looking dated. But I think doing that whole approach where, especially in the Hartigan story, when it feels like you're pretty much watching a 1940s movie just with a bigger budget, and a rapey yellow bastard in it, I feel like that fakeness kind of really adds to the whole, like, how when you look at a 1940s movie, it was always clear where a green screen was and all that, or where an obvious effect was. And it just gets wrapped right up in that. It just really fits the feel when you see something that doesn't exactly look real, because this isn't a world that's supposed to look real. I mean, it's literally, they took a comic book and copied and pasted it onto a screen and were able to bring it to life. So I always thought that actually had, not even, like, even if the effects do start to look dated, it's always gonna kind of go with the flow of what's happening with the rest of it, and always kind of, it's always like a backup that this movie will always have, which is convenient, but also just adds a other skill to the movie and the way it was accomplished. And the thing here is that with the visuals being such a point of attention, you would probably think that it would run out of gas eventually, and I know some critics at the time thought it did. But the thing that I think really helps is you add all these different stories and you mess up the timeline and all that stuff, that kind of Tarantino fashion. And with all these different stories going on that are told in different ways, like I said, even throwing the Hartigan prison story in there just adds a whole new feel to it when you're getting close to the climax, I think is what keeps it alive through the whole time. The style feels fresh through the whole movie because there's so much going on, but it's not the same thing. Like, if it was one continuous story, then it would wear out very quickly. So I feel like that's probably a good enough segue now to go on to The Spirit. Yeah, I do own it on DVD. It was like 50 cents at a flea market, and I thought, I'm gonna get that and say bad things about it on the internet. Only problem is I'm stuck with it now, but, well, I have plenty of bad shit over here, so this just fits right in. So, yes, basically, it seems that they were looking at The Spirit, and they thought they'd bring that to the screen, because everybody loves Sin City. So they look at Sin City, and they're like, how can we do The Spirit now? Well, let's just do that again. And that seems to be where their creative process stopped. So we have this news story about a cop that was murdered, and then he comes back, and he's fighting a villain called the Octopus. That's pretty much all we need to know. Everything else is they kind of tried to do the noir thing again that they do here, but like I said, it's really hard to accomplish that apparently, and The Spirit shows that sometimes you probably just shouldn't even try. Because it starts off and we get like in Sin City we get the different narration. A point I didn't talk about that I really love was with Hartigan, obviously we're getting the narration from the grave, which works very well, especially when he gets his last line after he shoots himself. But then there's narration like Marv, which works really well, and I love that the narration stops dead just as soon as Marv dies, and it really kind of finalizes Marv's fate, even though we see him alive again later because of the timeline. And Dwight too. So, and it just really kind of fit that vibe. Now here we have the narration again, where we saw the city, we saw all the back alleys of it, and basically Marv takes us on a tour of the city while he's, committing acts of vengeance. And the Spirit begins, and Gabriel Macht, I think is how you say his name, I'm not sure, is our lead actor. The guy from Suits. I don't know fucking anything about Suits. All I know is I looked that up, and that's what he's been doing. So I'm kind of surprised he's getting work at all after the release of this movie. But it begins, he puts on his red tie, because Sin City, I guess, and he goes out, and he's running along the clotheslines or whatever, and he's going out there to stop the octopus, and he's like, "My city." And when he says, "My city," and introduces it to us, we see like one building and a water tower. And he's running through the streets and atop of the buildings, and he's describing the city in a way like, he's describing it like he wants to fuck it. And as he's going, it's like we're kind of just seeing the same buildings as the very vague outlines here, which once again is kind of what Sin City did, but just the way we saw the ins and outs kind of gave us a vibe of what Basin City looked like and what it felt like and how just, gritty and grueling it all is. And even, especially in the second story, we get some nice shots, but here, it just feels like just these vacant backgrounds, and not in the way where I said Sin City feels like a 40s movie with all the fake backgrounds. This just looks like shit. This just looks lazily put together, and the way that he's just so, I guess the fact that he's describing it so much is supposed to bring it to life, even though it's a movie that's supposed to benefit from its visual style in the way that Sin City did. But it's like, you know what? He's describing this city to no end. Let's just have the audience take his word for it. And we'll just show them a couple of cardboard cutouts of fake buildings and a water tower. I don't know if that's the fucking same water tower we keep seeing, or if this city is just littered with fucking water towers, but that's the case. And so he goes along, and I was talking about, the Spirit comes off less like a hero. I don't know, he's not supposed to be, I don't know what he's supposed to be and what he's not supposed to be. He's not a cop, he tells us, not anymore. But I don't know if he sees himself as a hero or what the fuck it is, but he doesn't feel like a hero. He feels like the shitty sidekick of a hero. And there's this thing where it's supposed to be, when this movie tries to be funny, is where it really fails. And the thing here is, because like Sin City had this sense of humor about it, and there was maybe only one sense of absolute silliness, which would be when Jackie Boy sits on the throwing star and tells people not to laugh while it sticks out of his ass. That one moment in Sin City is like the entirety of the Spirit. Where it's like he's this bumbling buffoon, but only selectively. Like, at one point, he's talking to the octopus at the beginning, and the octopus is talking about his plans, and the Spirit says, crazy talk. That's just crazy talk. And I don't know if that's supposed to be funny, or serious, or what, but it's like, he's just acting like a fucking buffoon, but then in the next scene, he's like this hardened detective. And there's just no transitional period here. It's just sometimes he's comedic and slapsticky, and other times he's a serious detective, and there's just really no warning which one he's gonna be when the next scene comes around. It's a shitty fucking character. It's our title character. It's the hero of this story. He's narrating, and we're following him through this whole thing. This was a movie I was really excited for back in 2008 when the trailers came out, and it was like, oh, it looks like Sin City. Oh, Samuel Jackson's the villain, and he's got some cool costumes. I thought, "I'm the octopus, I've got 8 of everything" was a stupid line in the trailer, but I was like, well, he looks cool, and it's Samuel Jackson, he'll make it work. I'll bet this movie's gonna be awesome. And it was one of those cases where it was Christmas, 2008. I had just watched Marley and Me and The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. This was the third movie of the day. And obviously after Benjamin Button and the emotionally draining Marley and Me, you're pretty tired. And I thought for a long time maybe that's why I didn't like The Spirit, because The Spirit was one of those movies where even though I was excited for it, I knew it was. I think me and everybody else knew it was gonna be shitty. Maybe 3 minutes in, if that. It's just one of those movies that you kind of instantly know, like when Sin City starts, with that scene with Josh Hartnett and Marla Shelton, and you just see it, and it's like, this is gonna be good. This is gonna be so good. And then The Spirit starts, and we get about that scene. That Josh Hartnett scene's maybe 2 minutes long, and it takes the movie that long to let us know how awesome it's gonna be. And it pretty much takes The Spirit that exact amount of time to realize how the quality it's going to be. To its credit, it accomplished that pretty early, much like Sin City did, just in the completely opposite direction. So, let's go on to our villain, Samuel L. Jackson. And they really tried to build him up. They really tried to build up the characters. Remember I was talking about in Sin City about how massive all the characters feel, big or small, because they just feel like these huge personalities, with the exception of Michael Madsen, who I don't think was even trying. But in The Spirit, they really try to get to that point through dialogue. They try to make like every character have a mythology or something. And so there's this line. This might have been the moment I turned on the movie the first time I saw it. Where I was like, you know what? I'll bet this is bullshit. Like, I'll bet it's bullshit the whole time. And that was when they were talking, when that guy called him up, and he's like, hey, you know, we're down here. He thinks he's fucking Dick Tracy. That's what The Spirit thinks he is. He thinks he's fucking dead Dick Tracy, when, no, don't even insult Warren Beatty like that. So what we have here is this guy calling him up and saying, you know, oh, we got something going down. I think it's the octopus. And he's like, I want to hang up the phone now. Who knows how far his tentacles spread? And it's at that point where you kind of think, you know what? I think this is going to be an underwhelming villain. I think this dialogue is going to be incredibly underwhelming. Like, even being comic book dialogue, and often it's pretty cheesy in Sin City, but it still totally works in that, because it feels like it's of the era. Whatever era that may be, the era it's trying to convey, the dialogue works. 2 minutes into The Spirit, we get, who knows how far his tentacles spread. And it's trying to build up how big of a character the octopus is going to be. They do that also with Death, that Death woman, or whatever the fuck she is, where they say only sailors and cops can hear her. That's an interesting group of people. Specifically, cops and sailors. Okay, once again, this is all dialogues in like the first few minutes. And it's only downhill from here, believe it or not. So, going on, the octopus now. Like I said, I love Samuel Jackson in pretty much anything. Like, even if he's like Nicolas Cage, even if he's in the worst of shit, he doesn't care. He'll dive balls first into it anyway. He'll make it as big as he possibly can, and he will put all of his heart and soul in it and make this shitty dialogue as convincing as possible. I really can't tell if, because he's been in the greatest of the great, he gives one of the greatest performances of all time in the greatest movie of all time, in my opinion. And then, so you've gotta know, like, if he's in movies like Tarantino movies and all the big stuff, he's been in Goodfellas, he's in True Romance, he's in all this stuff, some of the greatest stuff ever. I love Jungle Fever, I still think is amazing. He's gotta know. Like, he's really gotta be aware when he's in a total piece of dog shit. But the great thing about that is you would never know, because he's so committed. Because, like, this moment when he's talking about, I don't want egg on my face, not a glob, and it's the worst dialogue you've ever seen, but he is so incredibly serious in his deliveries. in these stupid ass lines that may or may not even supposed to be comedic. In The Spirit, you really can't tell. I feel like the whole movie is supposed to be comedic, and it never once succeeds. And it just kind of... Or it's supposed to be serious, and the movie's just that fucking dumb. You cannot tell the difference, but either way, it's a total and complete failure. It's mind-boggling, this movie, but that's the thing, is you look at this character that they build up, and I guess it's supposed to be this thing where every time we see the octopus, he's in a completely new costume that's in a completely different thing. And I guess sometimes it's supposed to be shocking, but the first thing is we see him in this stupid hat where he's supposed to be like this rice farm or whatever the fuck. But the thing here is that he's right in the action in the very first scene. Like, he's here, he's shooting everybody, he's out in the nitty-gritty of it all. He actually dives down and swims after Eva Mendes and all that. And he's just right in it. So, later on, we realize that he's got these idiot henchmen that he creates, because he's trying to be God. These very, very poor attempts at comedy relief, all these different henchmen that are played by the same actor. You wonder... We see him, you know, firing all these guns. I mean, he's got 8 guns because he's got 8 of everything, and he's swimming after Eva Mendes and all that, and he's just ready to be right in this and just fuck all this shit up. But it's like, number one, why does he need all these henchmen just to take up all this time? Because they're not useful whatsoever. They're only here to die and to crack jokes, and they fail. And then for the rest of the movie, he's just sitting in his lair, waiting for the spirit. There's that moment, that stupid scene with the head on the foot, where he just keeps saying the same line over and over again, that's just damn weird. It's supposed to be funny the more he says it, but the more he says it, the more you're just wondering, why is this scene still happening? And in this scene, he just flat out says, I'm bored, when's the spirit gonna get here so I can kill him? And it's like, dude, in the very first scene of the movie, you just fucking went for it. And now for the entire rest of the movie, we're gonna pretend that didn't happen, and you're just a dude waiting around. You're just like every other villain now, just having henchmen do everything for him. Henchmen that can't do anything, are incapable of nothing. So that's the kind of villain he is. And then we have all these different... He's got lines like gum, you know, I hate stepping in gum. It makes you step funny, especially in winter. What does that even mean? But it doesn't matter because they're trying to distract us constantly with the octopus's costumes. So we've got, you know, like I said, we have the first scene, and then we've got the samurai scene. The samurai scene, it just gets worse and worse as it goes. And it's really, and once again, this is very early in the movie, and it is a scene that is so aggressive in its shittiness. Because we have, obviously, he does the thing where he kills his henchman again, and then there's no reason for him to be dressed like this. Is it supposed to be funny? I asked that question, so I think I asked that question in every scene of this movie that's not the flashbacks. Is this supposed to be funny? Or is it just so relentlessly dumb, I can't tell the difference? And the way this scene goes on, we're also introduced to this Scarlett Johansson character, who's basically just here to be beside him and to say, yeah, what you're saying's right, I encourage you, and to dress like he does as well. And her character's trait, I guess, is to call the henchmen embarrassingly juvenile names. Like, I don't even remember what they are now. I just remember saying, like, that's her dialogue, that's what she calls people. She's supposed to be this evil sidekick to a villain like the octopus, who's God knows how far his tentacles spread, because that's what we're led to believe. And it's just embarrassing everybody throughout it. And like I said, this is probably the worst scene in the movie, the samurai scene, which is saying something when you see the later shit. Okay, we've gone around it enough, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the scene where they finally capture the spirit. And Jackson and Johansson are dressed like Nazis. this has no bearing on anything. Is it supposed to be shocking? Is it supposed to be offensive? Is it supposed to imply that he's Hitler? It doesn't get any of these points across. I think it's too mind-boggling to be offensive or shocking. You just look at it and you say, why? And it's not in a shocking, oh my god, why would they do this, or an offended, oh, how could they do this? They are pushing the envelope, they are going so far. No, you're just watching it like you would watch any, I don't know. I don't fucking know. You just watch and you say, but why? There is no, I don't know. Is it the costume joke? Is that even a joke? I don't understand. So that's the only way that scene is offensive. It's not the fact that they're dressed like Nazis. It's the fact that there appears to be no reason whatsoever. It's just there. And it has there's no way to react to it. There's no way. You just have to ask why and hope that the movie moves on as soon as possible. Which, of course, it cannot. Because these scenes, especially the Jackson scenes, just go on and on and on. And it's almost like a competition to see which actor is going to embarrass themselves the most. Like I said, Jackson's commitment pretty much makes him unscathed, but you've got... I mean, this is... Another thing I don't get, this scene... We have the narration from the spirit through the whole movie, but then in this scene he decides he's going to break the fourth wall. And I think it's the only scene it happens. If there's another one, I've forgotten it. And it just shows just how completely clueless this movie is, as far as what it is, or what it wants to be, or what it wants to convey. It just exists, and it gets worse as it goes. And then we've got this whole Eva Mendes subplot, where we go back to her Ghost Rider days, which was just the year before this, where we get her whole childhood backstory with the hero, where they eventually got mad at each other and broke up and shit because her dad's a criminal or something. And we got these embarrassing young actors. Johnny Simmons, I think, is the kid that plays him, who we saw in later great stuff like the Stanford Prison Experiment, but I mean here, the young actors just totally embarrass themselves. There is one decent moment here, where we kind of hit an emotional chord, when it's, when we get the shot of her walking away, and it's like the red sky and all that, which is completely jarring when we just cut back to him and then back to it, because it's two totally different visual things going on here. But it's just that little moment that kind of hits a nice an emotional hit when he's screaming at her and she's walking away, and he's screaming at her and she's walking away, and then he says, "I hate you." And it's like, that's enough to like stop her for a second. And then she keeps going. And it's like, that really hurt her. And we feel that just by seeing her silhouette stop for a second when he says, "I hate you." And then the movie goes right back into its shittiness. We see present day the spirit, and we're like, oh, yes, the shittiness has returned. Just when we see his face, when you see the hero's face and you know the scene is about to go downhill, you should probably cancel your movie. But nope, this whole thing exists. And they actually thought that they were going to go on. They actually thought they were going to get sequels to this thing. There's even that joke in Kick-Ass when Mark Strong and Christopher Mintz-Plasse go to the movies and they're seeing The Spirit 3. And of course, all of the comic book fans in the theater have a nice laugh because it's like, that movie will never, ever, ever exist. And it's another thing when your hero, like, he dies, obviously, and then he comes back and he's the spirit. And then in the movie, he's killed again. And then it's like, the narration says, "Oh, no, here it comes, I'm dead again." And it's like, when your hero says, "I'm dead," that should not result in your audience saying, "Yes, thank God. Great, I am so happy about this." But, alas, they accomplished, once again, they accomplished something, if you want to call it that. And that's the problem here, is you look at, I hate to harp on this samurai scene, but really, let's just go through this. And you see, after a while, obviously, this movie just gets boring. When it's basically trying to be a detective movie, it gets boring. And that's the thing here. This is when this movie really, really reaches the depths of its absolute shittiness. And that is when you come to the conclusion that... I've said this many times before, and that is... There are two ways in particular that a movie can be really bad. They can just be flat out bad, just absolutely horribly miscalculated and terrible, horrible, unendurable, whatever. And then there's just boring. And the thing is that it's always been better to be totally, completely, insanely bad than to be boring. Because if it's bad, you're at least eliciting an emotion. You're getting something out of the audience, as opposed to just boring them. But the problem is, the point where the spirit totally transcends the badness of other movies is, this is a movie where when it's boring, it's behaving itself. Because this movie gets so relentlessly annoying, and so... the badness feels like a physical assault on you, that it's actually better off being boring than when it's bad. Because you could say a movie can... This is one of those movies that should at least be entertainingly bad, and I'm sure it's been excused a number of times with that. But I do not consider this entertainingly bad. When this movie is bad... Like I said, it feels like you're being assaulted with how bad it is. Like, when it's boring, at least you can take it. Like I said, when this movie reaches its absolute lows, it's not even entertaining. And you would think, a movie, it has the recipe for this. It's a movie that has a villain named the Octopus that's played by Samuel Jackson, whose big elaborate costumes change in every scene he's in, and in one of those scenes he's a fucking Nazi. This should be Iron Sky levels of, this is so crazy, I kinda like it. But no, this is when... These are the portions where the movie is just at an absolute and complete low, not just for the movie itself, but for movies in general. And that, it just really takes a lot. It takes a lot of terribleness for you to beg a movie to be boring. And for me, this movie accomplishes that. I totally get it. Just by looking at it, I can tell. There are probably people out there that are very entertained and get something out of it when this movie is being at its absolute worst. When these octopus scenes are just going off when Scarlett Johansson is saying the next embarrassing thing she's gonna say. But I just feel I feel like this movie really reached a low, and to be a movie that I was once excited for is something I can't even fathom anymore. Because there's not a frame of this movie that is satisfying. So I'm wondering how they even put a trailer together that made me say, that looks like fun. It's lost on me now. So, that is, to go from this to this is just... It really kind of shows you. I did see that, apparently there's going to be this, there's like another Spawn coming, and the creator is actually gonna, like, write and direct it. And you think, well, we'll see how that goes. Because you look at, like go away from comic books, go to novels, and look at Stephen Chbosky doing Perks of Being a Wallflower, and it's like, that was perfect. So, but then you look at stuff like Frank Miller. Obviously, with Sin City, we had Rodriguez doing a lot of pull here, with he and Miller getting co-directing credits. And when you look at The Spirit and you see Miller working alone, it makes you wonder just how much of Sin City is Rodriguez's accomplishment, despite the fact that it's the brainchild of Miller. And it makes you kind of worry when you look at stuff like Spawn is getting a treatment from its creator. It's like... Are we going to get something great? Or are we going to get this? I don't know. Maybe it's just a shitty story. But because Sin City had some really great stories in it, and like I said, Sin City had multiple stories with different timelines, which made it feel fresh the whole time. Maybe that'll help, but this tried to be one story, tried to do the same style, but just failed at everything so incredibly, it's hard to believe. I don't know. So, it's hard to believe this movie actually got to theater screens. Because I can't imagine anybody is happy with it. So, I don't know. But, there it is. There it is. And now it's on my fucking shelf forever. Great. So, I could sell it, but I don't know, it's a library. The library comes with the good, the bad, and the spirit. So, there you have it. That's going to be it for this week. I think I know what next week is. It's a movie a lot of people are crazy about, and a movie I may prefer to it. I'll have to revisit them to find out for sure. But it's going to be fun. We're actually going back to Westerns, so we'll see how that turns out. And we got, obviously, all the reviews coming, like, The Dark Tower, Detroit, Colossal, that Heigl thriller, and, whatever the other one was, The Circle, with Tom Hanks and Emma Watson. So we have that. So hopefully you'll be around for that. And if not, then I guess this is goodbye to you. So, that's it.